When Corita mentioned my very strong professional background to prepare me to teach basic writing, that is, graduate work in the American novel, I was thinking about how, when I first came to Community College Baltimore County, CCBC, they asked me to teach a developmental writing course. I had never had a course in graduate school in comp or comp rhetoric. I had a traditional literary background, and then much less any preparation to teach developmental writing. So I was thinking about faculty in Texas today faced with Public Law 2223 and all the things that you are. Now, some of you may be perfectly prepared to do this, but there are lots of you, I bet, that are like me, who did not, your graduate program included very little work on how to teach comp. If you did, I talked to some people last night who had a Ret Comp background, but very little preparation to teach developmental writing. Almost nobody had any preparation to teach the Corec version of developmental writing, because it wasn't even invented when most of you were in grad school. Furthermore, most of you didn't have any preparation to teach reading, and now we've integrated reading and writing. In Texas has done a really good job on that. And so you're being asked to do lots of things for which your preparation, at least mine, was really inadequate, and I had to figure it out for myself. And you're probably struggling with the same kinds of issues. But when they asked me to speak this morning, I was trying to think about what would be the most challenging part of teaching in a Corec program that I could talk to you about. I wanted to give you some practical advice. And it occurred to me that one of the things that I think is most important about the Corec model is it includes, in most versions of it, it includes a responsibility to address non-cognitive issues, all those things that cause students to give up and drop out of school. And so I decided that's what I'll talk about today. And Corita referred to some of the research we did. Here's just a little thumbnail sketch of it. This was a study that I did internally on an Apple IIe computer back in 1993. And we studied 863 students who had taken developmental ed in academic year 88-89. So we followed them for 4 years, and we discovered that 57% of them ever passed the developmental course. Not necessarily on the first try, but 57% passed it. And then came the most startling thing in the little red box there, and that is that 16% of those students never failed anything. They passed the developmental course and then dropped out of the pipeline. They disappeared. They did, for 4 years, they didn't even register for English 101. And then we started thinking about the box to the left. Well, I'll put a box around this one. And that I had always labeled failed developmental English. And then I started thinking about it. Most of the students in that group, those 373 students, most of them didn't fail anything. They also gave up, but they gave up before the end of the semester. I've often sort of sadly reported that if I had half my class still coming to class by Thanksgiving, I was having a good semester. And so what I began to see was we had a trouble with students dropping out during the developmental course, between the developmental course and the 1301 level course. And then the thing we all really wanted to see was how many passed that, we called it English 101, and it was only 33% of our students. So we recognized that the big problem we had was with students not completing the sequence, giving up, not failing anything, just giving up and dropping out. So then we tried to figure out why were they doing that? What was causing them to give? And we organized a series of focus groups. We bought a lot of pizza that year to bribe students with. And did you all get pizza? They were here for the focus group this morning? No, no pizza. So we bribed the students to tell us what if they had to drop out before the semester was over, what might cause that to happen. And they told us a lot of things. We put it into a monkey survey and did a survey of about 3,000 students. And based on that, we figured out that there were 3 big areas that caused students to give up, to drop out. And the first one is life issues. The second one is affective issues. I'll explain these in just a minute. And the third one we call college knowledge. So let's take life issues first. These you're probably familiar with. Lots of financial issues, lots of issues around their health or their children's health, housing issues, being evicted from their apartment, being thrown out by their parents, changes at work, either getting fired or getting hired full-time, so they had to drop out of school because they didn't have time to go to school, legal problems, problems with abuse in wherever they were living. And so those kinds of issues, this was the most common group of things they told us about. And affective issues, I have on the screen a quotation that I just heard over and over from my students. Maybe you've heard it too. Early in the semester, they would come up to me and say, Professor Adams, I'm just not sure I'm college material. And it makes me so sad. Whoever told them that there was such a thing, that some human beings are college material and some aren't, and they might be in this group? Who told them that earlier in their lives? And I don't know, but it's sad that they arrived thinking that. So we tried to figure out how do we help them with that problem. In those days, we offered a traditional prerequisite 3-credit-hour but 0 college credit developmental course, and we said to them, we said, you have to take this and pass this before we'll let you take a college level course. That, almost everybody in the country had that model a decade ago. But what the students, the message they got from that, they arrived thinking, I'm not sure I'm college material, and what they heard us saying to them was, we're not so sure you're college material either. In fact, you're going to have to prove it to us by taking this non-college course and passing it before we'll let you into a college-level course. So whatever insecurities they arrive with, we were just exacerbating those insecurities through the old prerequisite developmental course. So other things fit in this besides the not being college material fear. Sometimes that's described as the imposter syndrome. The student feels like, I don't really belong in college. I'm an imposter here. Some are afraid to ask for help. So sometimes students have the idea, if you've read The College Fear Factor, if you read that book, she goes over and over in there how students get the idea that if they go to their teacher and ask for help, that's a sign that they're not very bright. That's a sign that they're not a good writer. And they're afraid to reveal that, so they won't go ask for help. So that was a problem our students told us about. Some students are crushed by disappointing results on some early test or early paper that they write. And not knowing how to deal with disappointment, how to deal with failure was a problem they talked about. Many students' lives are stressful, so and we just add to it by all the things we want them to do so they will grow into being more effective writers, but they're dealing with a lot of stress. Many students feel isolated. They come to college, they don't know anybody, nobody in their family went to college, none of their siblings went to college, so they feel like they don't have any real connections, any friends, any bonds. Some students feel no attachment to the college. It's just where they drive in their car and spend a couple hours and then go to work 3 days a week. And finally, many students feel stigmatized by being segregated off in these non-collegiate courses for which they don't get college credit and where everybody in there has been judged to be a weak writer, and somehow they're supposed to learn how to write in that environment, which really, besides that's not a very good model for teaching writing, it's also not very good for their psyches. It's not very, I was talking to some, Mark, are you here? Yeah, I was talking to Mark about developmental textbooks last night, and he and I agreed that most developmental textbooks are large format with a spiral binding on them, and that students take those textbooks and put them in their knapsacks before they leave class and when they go to lunch in the cafeteria, so nobody will know that they're a developmental student because they're embarrassed by it. They're stigmatized by it. So those are the affective kinds of problems that we became aware of. Less commonly of the three were college knowledge. So students just don't know the vocabulary. If you tell them they need to pay their bill at the bursar's office, they have no idea what a bursar is. Worse yet, many of them have no idea what a syllabus is or what office hours are. And so they just don't have the vocabulary, particularly those that are first generation to go to college. They also are not aware of college protocols. What are you supposed to do if you're going to be late for class? What are you supposed to do if you need an extension on a paper or you want to withdraw it? What are the procedures? Also, what are the expectations? If you take a college level course, what are you supposed to do when you're given a homework assignment? What are the expectations of students in college? And finally, what resources are available? If I'm having difficulty, say, with a disability that I have, is there some place on campus I can go to get help with that? And so those were the 4 college knowledge areas we identified that students most of the time needed help with. I want to give you one more quote from a student. This is from an end of this is not my student. I wish she were. But at the end of the semester, she was asked to write a comment about the course. This was a traditional English 1301. And she wrote, "I'm really a bad writer, but my English teacher thinks I'm a good writer. So this semester, I wrote really good papers so she wouldn't find out what a bad writer I am." I just love, it's my favorite student quotation because I reflect back to what did we tell this student if she arrived on our campus and was placed in a developmental course? What we said is, we think you're really a bad writer. And what happens then? They produce some pretty bad writing. And so it seems to me that this teacher had stumbled on something that we would like to capture in a co-requisite model. So I want to argue, first of all, I decided to talk about the non-cognitive issue, these things that in the hub we're calling problems with school, work, and life. And I decided to talk about that this morning because I think it's the thing most English faculty are least prepared to teach, even less well prepared than to teach reading. And so one of the things I want to let you know about is if you're teaching in a Corec model, now what I'm about to go over is not true of all Corec models, but all Corec models have some of these features, and they're in the model, they're there to address some of these non-cognitive issues. For example, the fact that we put students directly into a credit level course is giving them the message we think they are college material. We think they can do college level writing. And so we're already beginning to try, rather than exacerbating their insecurities, to sort of give them a little more confidence that we have confidence in them. They're in a cohort that take 2 classes together. I think that's really important for addressing the isolation that lots of developmental students feel when they come to college. In many Corec models, this cohort is small, 10 or 12 students, and they take 6 hours a week, 3 hours in the 1301 and 3 hours in the Corec section, and they get to know each other. And they form the kinds of bonds that help them feel that they actually have a support group. They have friends at the college. The small class size helps tremendously. I always say, somebody said to me, the English teachers are always good at learning everybody's name. I'm not good at it. But in a good semester of a normal class with 20 or 25 students, I know everybody's name by the end of the semester. In my co-rec class, I not only know their names, I know their children's names, because there are only 10 or 12 of them. And I get to know them as full, whole human beings, including knowing what their anxieties are, knowing what their stress level is, knowing what their problems are. So class size helps. I talked about the stigmatizing effect when we segregate developmental students off into a class where there's nobody in the class except other developmental students. And for those of us that are doing lots of group work, peer response groups, why did we think it was a good idea to put all of our weakest writers in a class and have them do peer response? Why not put them in a class where half the students are 1301 level students? And not that they're all wonderful writers, but some of them are pretty good. And they also tend to know their way around campus better. So they're better role models, both for writing and for doing college. And then most importantly, what we do in most Corec models is shorten the pipeline. So that remember those 16% of my students in 1993 who passed the developmental course and dropped out of the pipeline without ever taking English 101? They can't do that in a Corec model because they're taking the developmental course and the 1301 at the same time. They can't drop out after passing the developmental course without trying 101 because they have to register for 101 concurrently with the Corec section. So those are the ways the model itself, regardless of whether you and I have any preparation to address non-cognitive issues, the very model that we're teaching in these days is designed to address those kinds of issues. The way we structure our courses can help too. For example, and this is something, I was never a big advocate of group work or active learning or discovery methods. That was not my thing when I was teaching a traditional course. I mean, I went into teaching so I could do what I'm doing right now, stand up in front of people and give a lecture. and you mean I can't do that anymore? I have to get them in little groups and let them talk to each other? The first time I tried it, I was won over completely, and I'm a big advocate of it now. But one of the ways it addresses these non-cognitive issues is it helps students get to know each other. It helps students bond, and they also learn a skill working in a group that they can use when they get a job later on. Backwards curriculum design, we used to design, in the way I designed developmental writing at CCBC was we looked at what were they missing, what didn't they get back in K through 12. Okay, so they don't know the 8 parts of speech. We'll start in September with that. The result was that the developmental class not only didn't give them college credit, but it felt like they were back in the 7th grade. Now in the Corec class, the way we decide what to teach in the Corec section is what do they need to pass the 1301. So we're working on college level readings and writings and discussions and so it feels like college. That problem of not being able to deal with disappointing results on an early test or an early paper, let's at least try to alleviate that by making all the early assignments low-stakes assignments. And then let's try to create a safe atmosphere. It doesn't always work, but I had a student named Mary, a Corec student, and I do a lot of Xeroxing of student papers with the names removed and passing them out to the whole class to talk about. And I always say, but if you don't want your paper reproduced, just write on the top of it, do not copy this, and I'll be glad to respect that. Mary had written that on the top of her first 3 papers. So I kept her after class, and I said, Mary, most students tell me in the evaluation at the end of the semester that the class period where their paper was the subject of discussion was the most useful class period in the whole semester. And she said, Professor, that's okay, but I do not feel comfortable doing that. And I said, well, I want you to know if you change your mind, it's okay at some point in the semester. She said, I'm not going to change my mind. About a week later, in the Corec section, she came up to me after class and said, Professor Adams, when are you going to copy one of my papers? I said, Mary, you told me not to. You told me you wouldn't change your mind. And she said, oh, that was there. In here, it's just fine. And it's something magical about that class, that it doesn't feel like a threat. It doesn't feel like a place they're afraid they're going to be exposed as the weak writer or the weak student that they're afraid they might be. And they're willing to have their papers discussed. So, safe classroom atmosphere. Not always, I've had semesters when I wasn't as successful as I wanted to be, but it often happens just magically.